Good afternoon. My name is Steve Kessler with Vertical Alliance Group, and I want to welcome everybody to our July Best Practices webinar series. We've got a really fantastic program in store for you guys today. But before I introduce our guest, I wanted to go over a couple little housekeeping items. As you may have heard on the announcement, you guys are in listen-only mode, which means we can't hear you. If you have a question, you have the ability to type in a question on a little place on the panel on your screen there. So please feel free to type in any questions that you might have. What we generally try to do is allow our guests to make their presentation, and then we'll take your questions at the end and do our best to try to get those answered for you. So one last thing, everybody that's attending today and those that registered that couldn't attend will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to a recording of this webinar. So if you have an interest in listening to it again or sharing it with someone that couldn't join us today, you'll be given the opportunity to do that. And we'll also be including as an attachment to that email a copy of the slides that'll be used in the presentation today. So having said that, let me introduce our guest today is Mr. Alan Hicks. Alan's been in the trucking industry for over 40 years, including 5 years as a driver for an LTL company. After he graduated from Jacksonville State University with a BS degree in accounting, Alan spent the next 22 years in the LTL industry holding various management positions. Alan joined B.R. Williams Trucking in 1997 as Vice President of Safety, Human Resources, and Government Compliance, a position he still holds today. In September of 2010, Alan earned the Certified Director of Safety designation. Also in 2010, Alan and Ward Warkentin formed Fleetmetrica Services and started working on creating a CSA Risk Assessment Tool to be used in the trucking industry to help carriers assess their safety programs as they relate to CSA. And Alan will be telling you quite a bit more about that today. So without further delay, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Alan Hicks. Alan?
Thanks, Steve. Welcome aboard, everyone, for the webinar this afternoon. As you see, the topic is a systematic approach to CSA. And as Steve mentioned, this project started about 2 years ago when we were looking at creating a risk assessment tool, and through that process we developed a one-day workshop. And what this webinar is today is a brief overview of that, what goes on in that workshop. Go ahead with the slide. And today's objective is basically to learn about a systematic approach to improving CSA scores and assessing your company's internal safety practices using our CSA Risk Assessment Tool, and learning about the safety management cycle as a management tool for continually improving CSA scores. And as you'll see as we walk through, it is an approach that has not been around that long. I mean, we're going to be looking at some areas on how we do build a strong safety program. Steve, go ahead to the next one. Slide.
Just a little bit, please.
Okay. And think about it. What is your organization doing differently since CSA was implemented? As Steve mentioned, I work currently for a trucking company and have been here for a good while. And, as CSA came on board back in 2010, they started talking about it even earlier than that. Back then we had the SafeStat system, and they were moving into the CSA program, and we started looking at what areas affect our safety ratings and, what areas we need to be working on. In the old program, you had to look at your out-of-service criteria and that type of thing. But now, as we moved into CSA, we're looking at all violations. And we probably all made some changes in our operation and how we do things. One of the areas could be changing our hiring practices. What are we doing differently now that we didn't do prior to CSA? And what tools have we added in the process, and some of the tools, we look at the PSP program and what that has done for the trucking industry, and looking at those and other tools, third parties that are bringing on where you can look at the data more and more. So there are a lot of tools that are being introduced to the industry on a day-to-day basis. And, looking at your scores a lot closer. Today you are looking at, down to the certain violations that you're having and, what's causing those violations. And, looking, what are you monitoring? Do you look at things differently, and what are you monitoring now than you did prior to CSA? Like I said earlier, in the old SafeStat days, we looked at what was when a driver and a piece of equipment was put out of service. But now you have to look at everything that goes on within the system. So it does have and has had a large impact and change within the industry. Slide. It's had a great impact on the truckload industry. It's also increased the number of motor carriers that have been shut down. We see periodically in print where the FMCSA has gone in and shut down a carrier because of a bad safety record. Large carriers have resources to address scores and performance issues, so they look at it. But the greatest effect is to push drivers with poor safety records out of the market. Increase competition for drivers with strong safety programs or safety records. When you look at your PSP report, what are you looking at there? So it does have and has had a big impact on CSA and the way we look at things. The next slide, we talk about the upward pressure on driver pay. To get those better drivers, you may have to pay a little bit. Continually, there's a continued tightening in the driver availability. Even in our company, we go through periods, and we have a very low turnover rate, so we're not looking for a large number of drivers. But as we go through, there's periods that we may not get an application for a week, and we have to go out and look at other means to find those drivers that we need. Tighter truckload capacity and higher truckload rates. We as a company are always looking, at how much freight we have and how many drivers we have, so the capacity is tightening, and some of that drives up truckload rates. The CSA data has contributed to a concern among the shippers. We probably all have shippers that are now requesting our CSA scores. They can go online and look at the scores there, but our major carrier or shipper is calling us periodically to give them our CSA scores, and if we have an area that is weak, what are we doing to improve on that? So many shippers are starting to look at that now. So it does have that impact also. Next, we're going to be looking at some statistics that are available through the FMCSA website and through the CSA data that you have there. And you can look, one of the number one issues they were having was to reduce the number of fatalities. And you can look back in 2006, over 5,000 fatalities. In 2010, it dropped down to about 33 or 3,400 and was about a 33% decrease. You look at 2011, and it jumped up a little bit, but it's still a 27% decrease there. I haven't seen any figures on 2012, but it is continuing to improve and lower level than it was several years ago and prior to CSA. The next slide talks about roadside inspections. In 2012, they did over 3 million inspections on drivers and had an out-of-service rate of 4.92%. And so, that has been basically flat for the last several years. Vehicle, over 2 million, and the out-of-service rate is there about 21%. Now, some of the top issues, especially in the driver being put out of service, is the hours of service. And in the vehicle, normally it's in the area of brakes and lights. So, those are always areas that we need to continue to look at. Then the next slide is an area which they are looking at warning letters, and we'll talk a little bit about the operations model and how and what steps and changes they have made in the way they look at carriers, and one of those is issuing warning letters before they come in, telling you have a weak area and requesting that you go in and start improving within that area. In 2011, you can see they had nearly 41,000 warning letters issued. 2012, about 24,000, and in 2013, this is on a 6-month period, a little over 10,000. So you can see if the trend goes for the rest of this year, a government year, it's going to be in the range of 20 to 21,000, which is less warning letters than they've done in the last few years. One thing that does indicate is that there's maybe less carriers with areas that are issuing that they need to issue a warning letter to. So we continue to see these improvements. The program is continuing to work, and so it is working. So we need to just pay attention to the program. We need to look at it and see what we can do as a company and continue to see our scores decline. The next one is talking about compliance reviews. In 2011, you can see they had about 8,000 full compliance reviews and about 4,300 focused reviews. Now, a full review is where they come in and they look at every aspect of your program. A focus is, okay, a carrier has an issue with hours of service. They are seeing a lot of roadside inspections and having hours of service violations, and they'll come in and only look at that part. So you can see the trend over from 2011, the number of full compliance reviews are dropping, and again, you can look at half a year in 2013, so you're going to be in the same area of about 8,600 that was in 2012. So they are continuing to go more toward the focused review than they are the full compliance review. So, that is a trend that has changed. And, one thing about it, in the past, they would come in, once a year, once every few years and do a full review. But now they are looking at us every month and, looking at our weak areas, and they'll send that warning letter out if there is a need. But the program is working. So, we continue to see and probably will see these numbers reverse into more of a focus area when they do contact us with a weak area. In the next slide, what have we accomplished with CSA, or what has the government accomplished? It directly monitors the safety performance on a monthly basis. Just like I said a few minutes ago, now they can look at us every month and they can start seeing trends in the direction your company is moving. And if they see your scores going up in a certain area, then they will send out a warning letter to give you indication that they are looking at you, and you need to put some kind of program in place to improve that score. Introduces a new enforcement and compliance model, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and we'll see that shortly. But it also helps identify problem areas for a trucking company. You can look at your scores and go through the basics and look at each one of them. You know what areas you need to work on at that time. So you can direct, working with drivers individually that are causing you problems. You can look at what areas, of training you need, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. And just, it gives you a good idea of what areas you need to be working on. It also helps identify problem drivers. When that first report came out in December 2010, I pulled up the reports and I started looking at drivers that were causing me problems, and I brought them in and had one-on-one meetings and showed them their scores and where they stood and said, hey, what do we need to do to work together to improve? Some of them improved, some of them didn't. So, there's always that there, if they are willing to work, because you think about it, when they have those roadside inspections and they're doing something wrong, it's not only a reflection on them, but it is also a reflection on us. So that moves. The next slide shows us the new ops model that the federal government is using now. And, you know, they've always collected safety data, and they, you know, they've looked at it and, you know, through the inspections and the crashes, and they gather all of this data. And prior to CSA, they were, you know, going through the SafeStat system and only looking at out-of-service criteria. But as you can see, and this slide is just a little bit outdated because it doesn't have the most recent changes, but you look at the basics. The unsafe driving. Fatigue driving is now hours of service, driver fitness, controlled substance, vehicle maintenance, and cargo is now rolled into vehicle maintenance, and you have the hazmat basic and then the crash indicator. And only a few of these are seen by the public when they go online. So they take all of this data, they throw it into the measurement system under one of the basics. And if you ever go to the website and look at the methodology, there's hundreds of pages walking through this methodology. One thing that I was trying to do when I was transforming from SafeStat to CSA was try to figure out some of the calculations, and you couldn't do it. So, you know, it was just with my accounting background, and, you know, it just didn't work out. So they take the safety data, they take the measurement system, and then they start evaluating. And, you know, you have the alert system, then you can do a safety fitness determination that is coming sometime in the future. And then they look at the intervention process. I said prior was basically full compliance reviews, but now they, you know, do the warning letters, and you can look at your safety data. And then what that does, if you have bad scores in an area, they may target you on roadside inspection. The ISS score is something that, you know, a lot of troopers out there will pull up when you're crossing the roadside inspection stations, and, you know, look at what your scores are and see if there is something there that says that they need to pull you in. So you look at the, like I said, the investigation part of it, the focused and the comprehensive reviews, and they can do an off-site review to get you to send in the information. And the follow-up is basically a corporate safety plan, putting a plan together, and that's what this overview is trying to help the company do, is to, you know, help put a comprehensive safety plan together. Notice of violation, notice of claim, and so forth. And, you know, they can, again, like we mentioned a while ago, talk about and put a carrier out of service for bad scores. So, you know, you can go through this process and you can look at your CSA scores, but the next slide talks about why going beyond the CSA scores. As we said, CSA scores are the result or output of how well you manage safety in your business. You need to look beyond the scores to see what's driving those results. And as we walk through that, and as you see that, that's what this process is all about. CSA scores are a result of safety violations, and during the inspections they're entered into the MICNIS database, and then they use the safety management system assessments to look at these safety violations. And if you're only reacting to individual scores, and you're only operating in a reactive mode, waiting for something to happen, and whether it be an incident or an accident, before you take action. And, you know, that's what we want to be. We want to be proactive in the way we address safety. You know, we need to look at it if we're having a problem in a specific basic. We can look at it then and look at the individual scores and see what type of violations we're doing there. Or we can set up a program that helps reduce all violations and look at our entire program. And the next slide talks a little bit more about why going beyond. And, you know, you look at every one of the basics has a threshold. You know, is our goal to get just below that threshold under each basic and keep it there and not jump above? Or is it to continually, as we go under the threshold, continue to move downward and get our lowest possible score that we can? And we can do that by analyzing the basics or looking at the key processes within our business. And we do that by using the safety management cycle, looking at the components of it and strengthening each one of those within each key process within our company. And what by doing that, we're linking CSA to our operation. And the next slide just shows us a little bit about, going beyond the threshold. It's good business sense. If we reach the threshold, we have cut down on violations. We have done something. But, you look at if you continue to improve your scores, then you continue to go below the threshold. And basically what it does is, you may have less repairs on the road. You may have less accidents. How many times have we had a driver late on the road, he goes in for a roadside inspection and he, has to sit there, and the repairs that we do on the road are a lot more costly than the ones that we do in our own shops. So, all of these things can affect our scores and also affect the bottom line of our businesses. So, we need to be going and looking at ways to improve beyond each threshold. So the next slide gives us just a little bit of a demonstration here. You think about preventing DOT violations, and as I was putting this slide presentation together several months ago when we started looking at our workshops, and what is a picture of being proactive? And you think about when you're going to be going out and the weatherman that morning has told you it's going to rain. What do? You carry your umbrella with you, and when it starts to rain, you put the umbrella up to protect yourself. Now, think about each one of these raindrops as being a violation. And, what do? You build that shield around you or above you, and you do that by strengthening your safety program. You can do it, and, all of us have preventive maintenance programs on our equipment. What can we do to do that? We need to look at that program, and it may be good, but can we make it better? And what can we do to make it better? And that's what this program does. So we need to have that strong program in place to prevent any type violations. We don't need to settle for, hey, we'll have one occasion, but we need to be working our programs and building our programs that we we'll be able to have zero tolerance on our violations and, keep our scores down. The next couple of slides we'll flip through here is just looking at some scores that I pulled out. Are these your scores? Do you have alerts out there that are way above the threshold? Or by looking at this, you have areas to improve on. And, what are you going to do to improve on these areas? Okay, the next one, it looks at a carrier with good scores, nothing above the threshold, no alerts, and the scores are low, but are you satisfied with these scores? In 2009, the government always does, how and what are the top issues within the trucking industry. And in 2009, CSA wasn't even on the chart. In 2010, it jumped up to second on the chart. 2011, everybody was getting a little bit used to it. It dropped to fourth. But in 2012, it was back to the #1 issue in the trucking industry. And to think about it, within your own company, where is it on your list of major issues? What is it there that in an area that you need to be working on? So, look at your scores. You need to be looking at them on a monthly basis. What direction are they going in? What do you need to do to even get them further lower than where they are currently? So, you look at, and we're going to the next slide, looks at defective trailer lights, okay? You think about a driver gets out on the road and he has defective trailer lights. Who's responsible for those trailer lights? You think about maintenance is the first thing. Hey, they didn't do the repairs on the truck. Okay, safety, we've got to train these drivers and hiring in the hiring process. And, in training, did we train that driver to do either a pre-trip inspection, and did we train the shop personnel to look at the areas? I mean, if the way we do it at BR Williams is, I look at my scores, and if I'm having, certain areas of problems, then we will address it in the shop and make sure that those people are looking at it when they look through the equipment. So everybody plays a part in every violation that's out there. So, the next area we start looking at is the CSA Risk Assessment Tool. And we sent out an email, and we've had about 30 to 40% of the participants in the webinar to go to our website and look at this CSA Risk Assessment Tool. And like I mentioned earlier, this is an area that we started working on originally, and it didn't take us an overnight to do it. We worked on that program for about 6 or 8 months before we put it together. And as you look at it, we, really thought through a lot of those questions and, trying to get them to get ideas. Now, one area and one thing that we always bring out when we're talking to companies and we're looking workshops or webinars is, the CSA, the risk assessment tool is available and it's free and you can use it, but get several departments within your company to go in and use the CSA risk assessment tool and, look at everybody that is playing a part in it and try to see, what they think about safety, and so, it gives you an idea of, areas and what departments, where it is on their priority list. In the workshops, I talk a lot about safety culture. What is the safety culture within your company? And, working through the CSA risk assessment tool may help you get a feel for, what some of the other departments are thinking about. Okay, so what is the intent of the risk assessment tool? On the next slide, we talk about that, and it basically gives you a simple assessment of your safety management cycle. To enhance the usefulness of the safety management cycle as a mechanism for improving safety and CSA scores. And the use of gap analysis, which is a tool that compares performance with potential performance. And what we're talking about there, where are you at now? Where do you want to be? And so you've got to figure out how you're going to get from point A to point B. The safety management cycle, like I mentioned earlier, is something that's been around. When we first started working on the CSA risk assessment tool, we started looking a lot at the CSA CSA website, and there you had to dig deep into the resources there, and they had a lot of information on safety management cycle. Now you go to the CSA website, and the safety management cycle is there right on the front page for you to see. So it is moving more and more to that part of the program that the government is going to be using, and we're walking through that. So we just look at it. The next slide talks about what it consists of. It basically surveys your safety practices within your company. It rates the carrier performance around the safety management cycle. What we do is the questions are put out there in a random fashion, and then they are related to each one of the parts of the safety management cycle, and we'll look at those in a few minutes. And so then we put the score together, and then you get that result from that. And this is by no means a definitive list of the leading safety practices. It's just a random list that we put together to gauge your safety program. And the next slide is just basically a sampling of some of the questions there that fall under the first 10 questions, and you can look at there. Does a safety plan exist that includes all aspects of how the carrier ensures safety, and so forth? Does the driver manual cover internal follow-up on federal motor carrier violations and have policies and procedures there, and so forth? So you can look at that, and the next page shows how those results are demonstrated to you, and you can see then through answering your questions how you fall within each area of the safety management cycle. And these are the elements of the safety management cycle. You see this company here basically has a very strong score, 4.9 out of 5 on the policy procedures. Roles and responsibilities drops a little bit. Their qualifications and hiring is very good. You get into the training, it's fair at 4.4. Then you get into the monitoring and tracking and meaningful action. But it basically gives you some ideas of where your weak areas are. And as you have other departments within your company talk about and go through these questions and look at it, you can compare those answers and get some pretty good picture of where you stand and what everyone's idea is of safety within your company. The next slide is basically a picture of the safety management cycle, and this is what you see when you go on the Federal Motor Carrier website. And you can see here it's a 6-part, starts with policy procedures and moves right around through roles and responsibilities, qualification and hiring, training, monitoring and tracking, and meaningful action. And, you know, why do you think it's in a wheel? It's a never-ending process. You know, this is something that you can always walk through and look at it. And, you know, if you change a policy procedure, then everything goes through. You have to make changes all the way through it. If you get to meaningful action and, you know, you have areas that you need to change, you may need to change a policy. So what does that do? That causes you to walk through each process of it. So, you know, we can look at this as, you know, our guide to improving our safety program. The next slide just basically lists the basic categories. And, you know, you can use a safety management cycle to walk through either one of these. If you're having problems in hours of service, driver fitness, or whatever, vehicle maintenance or whatever, you can put that safety management cycle over within that and use it to improve that score. Or you can address it by, you know, looking at key processes within your company, and, you know, you can look at that. The next area slide just shows us how we do that in our workshops. We go in and we have the participants in our workshops to look at and start listing all the key processes within their trucking company that can impact safety. And, you know, you start looking at that and you're looking at the overall program and safety emphasis within your company. Like I mentioned a while ago with light violation, you know, what departments are affecting that and what departments do you need to look at. So, you know, we can look at that and walk through that. Some of the key processes on the next slide that we have discovered, in, you know, some of them are the maintenance department, training, drivers. Some of them have brought law enforcement up before, cargo and handling or shipping. You know, third-party OSHA, DOT, some of those play a part in it. Orientation, and you can see the list goes on, dispatch. Family issues can play a part in it. You know, how many times you had a driver leave the terminal, him and his wife or his family has had problems prior to him leaving, and he forgets to fill out his logs when he pulls off the yard. Okay, he gets down the road and an officer pulls him over. So, you know, all of these can play a part in it. You know, not all of these are key processes or activities, but, you know, you can walk through this. About 2 years ago, I walked through this whole program and identified about 15 key processes within our company. And, you know, use the safety management cycle to look at each one of them. And so, you know, we have that as an example of moving forward. The next slide just depicts what you can do as far as using the safety management cycle. You can look at the basic categories. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can just lay it over one of those, and we'll show you how you do that in a few minutes. Or you can take one of the key processes or departments within your company and look at that. So, you know, you can use it in either way. When we first started looking at it, we were more toward using it with the basics, but as we got more and more into the process, what we were looking at was trying to improve a safety program. So we started using in our workshop looking at the key processes. Okay, the next slide just basically talks about what a safety management cycle is. And basically it is a structured investigative tool. The auditors, the DOT auditors, when they come into you, in an intervention process, I mentioned the cooperative safety program. And they can use that along with the safety management cycle if you have very bad scores in an area, and they will walk you through the safety management cycle. So it is a tool that they use. They use it to help you and talk to you about ways to improve in certain areas. And it also helps you to implement a safety management process. And again, I can't emphasize enough that it is a never-ending process. You can look at it. As I mentioned, I looked at and did the safety management cycle over some of our key processes, and currently I'm in a process of starting to relook at all of my processes and look at them and see what we can do there. The next slide talks about just what is the intent of the safety management cycle. It is to encourage carriers to operate more compliantly and safely, to assist carriers in the identification of safety management tools, to assist carriers in developing corrective and preventive actions based on high basic scores, and also to assist carriers in developing early warning signals and intervention strategies for high basic scores. So, it's basically helping you to be proactive. Look and learn who's doing what within your company, what needs to be done to improve scores, and what to look for in the process. The next slide just talks a little bit more about using the safety management cycle. It basically helps to identify who, what, where, and why, looking at the major departments, the key processes within your company. It introduces a process for evaluating the effectiveness of the program, looking at, is there a weakness in a certain department or process that you need to improve on. It also helps to demonstrate the interrelationship of the company departments within the safety management plan. Safety within a program, within a company, is not a one department issue. It is an issue for all people within all parts of the company. So we can look at that. Now we're going to move into building and what we do to build a strong safety program. And these are the elements of the safety management cycle, and we're going to walk through them. And I've got it in a pyramid type thing because it's basically you're building from the foundation up. And to me, the policies, procedures are the foundation of any safety program. If you don't have it in writing and you don't have it spelled out on your employees so they'll know how to do things, it's not any good, and you need to get that done. The next slide just is an example of some of the questions that, I've jumped ahead here. We're looking at the next slide, the definition. Basically, policies, procedures are typically organized organized around a carrier's core business processes such as safety, hiring, training, and maintenance. A policy is a guiding principle, and then the procedure is a particular way of accomplishing an activity or a process. Basically, it is a series of steps that need to be followed. The next slide is basically just an example of some of the questions or a particular procedure that is written out. What policy procedures you need within that process that you're in. Do they cover what you need? And think about, are they in writing? Do you put them in writing? Are they reviewed periodically? Everything changes. Regulations change. The way we do business within a company changes. So we need to be looking at that. And the next slide talks about just a few tips on looking at policy procedures, ways to strengthen your policies and procedures within your company. What should be done? Who will do it? When will it be done, and in what sequence? How will it be done? What equipment, tools, or materials? What forms? What paperwork do you need? You can use a flow chart, which is basically an ISO tool that can be used. Is everything have dates signed, when it was put into effect, so you can refer back to it on any changes? Does it refer to any standards or regulations that are out there? Does someone own that procedure? Are they in charge of it? So, these are all important things to look at. As I reviewed and looked through all the regulations pertaining to the basics, I looked and discovered about 50 policy procedures that could be part of a safety management program. So, these are important. The next one just shows the next step in it, which is the roles and responsibilities. You have the policy procedures. Now, who carries out those roles? Who is responsible for each one of them? Some of the topics that we look at here on the next slide is, who is responsible for safety within your company? Do you have someone that is over safety, that oversees that? Are the roles and responsibilities known throughout the company? Does the driver know who to go to when he has a particular problem? Is it spelled out? Is he told that when he is brought on with a company? Are all the roles and responsibilities defined within your safety management program? Do they know who, if you have an auditing department, and so each one of these needs to be spelled out in the program. And as you walk through it, think about, what you need to look at. The next slide just basically spells out the definition. Roles and responsibilities for safety are defined within the company's core procedures. As you look at the procedures, then someone is in charge of that, and they have the responsibility to oversee it. Are the roles and responsibilities clearly and completely outlined in a company job description, or in appropriate training and evaluation is included in it? Or is there training if a person comes into a role, and we all see people move into new roles within a company? I periodically talk to someone. Recently I talked to someone that it was their first day on the job, and I think we can all remember back to when that happened. So we can look at it and decide, and we need to have all of these spelled out. So the next slide is just basically a sampling of those questions under roles and responsibilities within the CSA Risk Assessment Tool. Then you move on to the next step. We've had policy procedures. We have our roles and responsibilities spelled out, and then we move into the qualifications and hiring and all. And some of the discussion topics that we mentioned on the next slide is defining the qualification and hiring activity, spelling it out. What guidelines and requirements do we have, for looking at applicants in whatever category we're looking at, whether it be a driver, it be a mechanic, it could be a dispatcher or whatever, because all of these people are looking at and have an impact on safety. So it has an impact on our scores. When you're looking at driver hiring, do you have, what considerations do you have in place there? Do you have something in writing as far as the guidelines to what carriers you want to look at? And also, all of these are important in that process. The next one is the definition. Defining the qualification covers practices that are essential in qualifying and hiring drivers and other staff, just like I mentioned just a few minutes ago. These practices are identified in company procedures and are associated with specific job titles that have the responsibility for completing each one. So you can look at this, that you have, each one of these, you have the policy procedures. As we move and look at the next slide is where the next step is. Roles and responsibilities, the qualifications and hiring. This is just a sampling again of the questions that are within the CSA Risk Assessment Tool. Then you move into training, and with the next slide, the next step of it. You've had the roles and responsibilities of the policies and procedures. You've got your roles and responsibilities spelled out. You have your qualification. Now you've got to do the training. This is where one of the key areas in this whole process. If you have a weak training program within your company, how is everyone going to know about everything that they need to know about the procedures and the policies, and making sure that everybody knows who to go to, what roles are there. And with a driver, this starts basically with a hiring process and during orientation. What you do from that point on, it never stops. You can look at the program, and you can always see ways of improving it. The definition of training, and we see on the next slide. Is there evidence of a training schedule or an attainment of minimum skill levels for the company procedures and all of other safety-related people within the company? Do you have some type of evidence of that training? The old way, we have the paper trail that we have to keep up with, and we have, personnel files that get thicker and thicker every year. Employees cannot be expected to perform any job unless they know their responsibilities and they have had the appropriate training to do that. And we communicate it through, training processes, and we can look at that. So, training is very important to me. Again, it is the key process. The next slide just gives us a few tips about training. It opens up channels in the organization. You can use it in varied formats. How often do you need to use it? Do you know what your training needs are? Do you have a training schedule? Is there a record of training? You know, is the training short, concise, and focused in the areas that you need it in? How long are the training? Is it a 30-minute or whatever, or is it a short type training situation? Do you test the ones that are doing the training to see what the scores are? And then we walk in with the next slide, 4 basic steps of training. You've got to have an analysis of it. You've got to establish what your needs and what training you need, what type training is needed, when is the training needed, who needs it, and who will do the training. You know, not every department or every person in a department may not need that training. But then you've got to develop the training program and any manual that you're going to use. You've got to put it together to cover the policies, procedures, and standards that you have out there. You've got to gather all this material together. The next step in it, with the next slide, shows how do you deliver it. Do you designate a trainer? What type of training do you use? Do you use one-on-one, groups, workshop, web-based training? And I'll get into that in a few minutes. Evaluate the training program. Do you have surveys? Do you have documentation of it? So training is the key to any successful safety program. If you don't train from the driver to the dispatcher to the maintenance person, to anyone within your company, you know, it can cause weaknesses within your area. So you go through the training, then you saw with the next area, you look at monitoring and tracking. With the next slide, I'm trying to get ahead of myself. We're running short on time, but here is a sampling of the questions within the CSA Risk Assessment Tool. And then you get into the next area, next slide, see, monitoring and tracking. And so I hope that you can see as this moves forward that you do the training, okay, then you're monitoring and tracking what training you have done and see if it's successful or not. And, you know, we can look at some of the key areas there on the next slide within monitoring and tracking. You know, what areas are you measuring? What key measures are you looking at? Are you making use of CSA? Are you looking at the OBR data? Are you auditing and measuring the processes to make sure you're getting the data? And then you look at the next slide with the definition. And you see this section deals with a feedback loop to the carrier and driver to monitor fleet safety. These activities outlined in the procedures contribute to the observation, supervision, review, and measurement of the activities related to the responsibilities of the company personnel. So, you know, you look at some of the things that we do within BR I post my drivers' ranking in scores from time to time. We have a incentive program if they know where they stand, and, you know, we give them scores monthly on, you know, where they have violations and all. So, you know, the more you keep it in front of them, the better off you are. The next slide just depicts some of the questions that are in the CSA Risk Assessment Tool there. So you can see you've got to monitor it and you've got to track it, you've got to walk through it. The final part of the safety management cycle that we see here is meaningful action. What are you doing after you walk through all of these processes? You put it in place, you define the roles and responsibilities, you define the qualifications, you do the training, you start monitoring and tracking it. If you find a weak area, what do you do as far as meaningful action? And the next slide we look at here talks about, you know, when is it warranted? Does it address CSA scores? You know, through this process, do you need to do some things to take some proactive measures to look at it in the future and eliminate these type scores? Then you look at the next slide that talks about the definition. It relates to actions a carrier takes to address safety-related concerns and opportunities for strengthening overall safety performance. Includes all actions taken for what has happened in order to make unsafe results. So you can see that this moves through this process, and it may mean that, hey, we need to change a policy. We may need to change a procedure, and we do that by changing the training process. And the next slide, and this is the last one of this part of it, is just another area that depicts the area and some questions that are in the CSA Risk Assessment Tool. I can't emphasize enough for you to go online if you haven't used that tool to use it. So the next slide, just again, is that pyramid looking at how you build a strong safety program and looking at each aspect of it. And, you know, I can talk for many, I say hours, I probably could, but, you know, as you walk through this, as we get into it every time we go into a workshop or we do webinars of this type. You know, you can spend time in each one of these areas and looking at them and seeing what areas you need to improve on. And using the CSA Risk Assessment Tool to look at your weaknesses, look at the key processes, and look at the basics, and try to decide what route you need to do to overall improve your safety program, but also at the same time to improve your CSA scores. You know, what should your plan include on the next slide? You know, you look at it, you analyze and start it with the risk assessment tool. You can use our tool. There may be other areas or other aspects of things that you can use to look at it. You start addressing the known problems based on your CSA scores. Try to improve what weaknesses you have in your scores immediately, but also use it to improve your overall safety program. You can look at immediate. Hey, let's get this hours of service score down. The short term, you know, within the next 6 months, but the long-term activities of your plan is the plan that you need to be working toward and using the safety management cycle to have a strong safety program. Then you got to think about it, organize yourself, put it into motion. What are your objectives? What responsibilities do you want to pass out within it? What timeline, what resources do you need, and what training? And, you know, again, I cannot emphasize enough that you need to include other departments and not just your safety department. So, you know, you can look at that. The last couple of slides is just giving you a little bit of information about Fleetmetrica services. We do, like I said, you have gone over in about 50 minutes what we do in about an 8-hour workshop. We get into a lot more detail. We can do these publicly or privately. We have web-based tools out there. Vertical Alliance is hosting this webinar today. How we came about in getting involved with Vertical Alliance. When we started this program and we started looking at the training aspect of it, we started looking at a lot of programs out there and looking to see what would be the best program to fit a trucking company's safety program and how we could use it. And so I've been into the program with Infinity at BR Williams now for a little over 1.5 years, and you know, I can show you definite results in a lot of our CSA scores and other areas that we work at. Prior to using Infinity, I was holding quarterly meetings and probably getting about 60 to 70% of my drivers on a quarterly basis. And since we've gone with Infinity, we're doing 4 to 5 topics a month. We're reaching 90 to 95% of our drivers every month on some type of training program. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of using a good training program such as Infinity. The next thing is Safety Monitor. My partner and I are working on a dashboard for safety to use with trucking companies. It's still in the beta stage, but we're working toward that agenda. So, you know, we'll be hopefully getting that out more and more in the near future. So we are also working on a webinar series going along with this, and the next slide you look at is basically an agenda for our workshops. And as you walk through this, you can see in the first 4 or 5 bullets there is a morning session, and then in the afternoon session we really get into the meat and bones of a safety program using the safety management cycle and then putting it all together to improve your safety program. So, you know, hopefully this has given you an idea of areas that you can improve your safety program, and, you know, using the tools, I mean, it's there. You know, we're available. I'm available to help you, you know, through Steve and all Vertical Alliance. You know, you can reach them, which reach me there through them, because I am affiliated with them also with the Infinity program, other than also using it at BR Williams. But I appreciate you attending today, and Steve, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alan. That was great information. There's a lot of information presented there, and I'm sure that you're going to get plenty of questions after the fact. One question that I had, Alan, is when you're ready to, you know, make use of the safety management cycle and implement it in your company, would you suggest to people to to take that basic there that you have the worst scores and start there first, or should you try to work with all of them at one time?
Well, if you try to work with all of them at one time, you're going to get spread out. I mean, if you've got immediate problems in a specific basic, I would work with that and, you know, try to get your immediate problems corrected and improve on those scores, and then, you know, start looking at it. Like I said, you can either look at it by the basic or by the key processes, but I would not try immediately to start out where, and it gives you practice. I mean, you know, on how to use the system by doing it that way.
Okay, okay. You know, is it possible, I know we're running a little bit short of time, but could you give perhaps a sort of a specific example on one of the areas in the cycle that maybe you've done yourself or one of your other clients have done and what the outcome of that was?
Well, you know, we work with several companies with this. You know, I can give you an example of when we had our maintenance scores when we first started with CSA. Our maintenance scores started going up dramatically, and through third party, and there's several third parties out there that look at CSA scores. I pinpointed our maintenance problem down to one inspection station at one location. Yeah. And, you know, we started looking at it, and we actually went down and spent the day with them. This was down in South Texas, and we spent the day with them. We looked at not only me, but my assistant and the individual over maintenance with our company. We came back, you know, we started looking at, you know, the violations we were having and what we needed to do to improve that score. And we not only included maintenance, we included dispatch. You know, we set up procedures for every truck going in that direction. We made equipment changes. And we also got with our customers on both ends and adjusted some delivery times. And, you know, we had a big trailer pool there. We designated a certain amount of trailers to that one particular move. And now my scores are down in the 20s. So, okay. I mean, it definitely works.
Fantastic. Alan, it looks like that we're at the end of our hour, and we try to limit it to an hour because everybody's busy, and we understand that. So once again, Alan, thank you for some great information. I'm going to put this slide back and let everybody see your email address and phone number one more time. I'm sure Alan is more than happy to take an email from you or a phone call and try to help you in any way that he can. But I want to thank everybody that attended today. I think you know, CSA was a game changer in this industry, and if we don't try to manage it properly, it can cause an awful lot of problems for both drivers and carriers out there. So once again, thank you all for attending today, and we'll look forward to having you on our next session in August. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Alan. Bye, everyone.
Okay, thanks.